Welcome back. We're here with Mark Smith talking about all things FX and ECNs in particular. Mark, Gil Mendelzis, formerly of Triana, now head of EBS, ICAP's large FX ECN, put out today some best practices, all of which make perfect sense to me, but there's always the argument of what is their self-interest and what they're doing. Can you quickly summarize the kind of questions they were asking and why they encourage customers to ask these questions?
Sure. I think it's interesting. Gil has done some very innovative things since he took over a very bureaucratic organization that was EBS. And part of that all comes around sort of formalizing rules for the market and best practices. Last year, he changed the trading rules on the actual platform, which has now been rebranded EBS Market, to really kind of drive how orders are being executed. And now he's coming out and opining on aggregators. And ECN's not EBS is not an aggregator.
So EBS had lost a little momentum. They changed the rules. What did they change and why? Or why do you believe you speculate why?
Well, yeah, EBS had lost about 20% market share, and a lot of that has to do with, or at least perceived had to do with their prime broker product when they brought the buy side into this pool of liquidity. For many, many years, EBS was a pristine, bank-only pool of liquidity with all natural bids and offers, and it was sort of the top of the pyramid where all pricing sort of trickled down from. Reuters has a few currencies that they specialize in, but everybody looked at EBS as the market. When the high-frequency people joined this marketplace and started to act the way they would tend to act in a central limit order book environment, it made a lot of banks unhappy. The banks lost sort of their superior position. They lost the control of the market in some places, and they started to look for alternative ways to get their liquidity out or to execute orders away from EBS because they were just unhappy with how that worked.
Well, EBS wasn't the first people to let high-frequency traders in. CurrentX, Hotspot, others had, right?
Well, the difference is that CurrentX and Hotspot and Lava and MatchBook and all those other guys were founded on those type of customers. EBS was a consortium founded by banks that solely executed amongst banks and very aggressively protected their pool of liquidity because that and the Reuters pool of liquidity were the most pristine, most valuable pool of liquidity in FX. They were the real natural bids and offers. When we talked about phantom liquidity, I think section 1 or 2, there was no phantom liquidity in EBS. It was all real orders to be done, deals to be done. So when the high frequency kind of blended into this, it really changed the way business was done inside EBS, and it made the banks unhappy. So much so that they looked at potential consortiums to build, other platforms to go to. And when Gil came in, he looked at this and said, okay, this isn't how I believe a market should operate. And he changed the rules. He changed the frequency of updates. He changed how the high-frequency traders could connect via an API, what type of orders they could send, how they could execute. The matching rules inside EBS, I don't know if many people know this, but EBS actually ran a distributed matching business. So the central limit order book would move based on time zone. So during New York time, the orders were arbitrated by a matching engine in New York. During Asia, they were arbitrated by a matching engine in Japan. And during London, Europe, they were arbitrated by a matching engine in London. And so depending on which time of day it was, the time to get your order executed changed. And they thought by balancing it that everybody had a fair shot at one time during the day. You were the closest to the matching engine, and therefore you would win in the case of ties. He changed how all that worked, as well as how the high-frequency guys integrated. And I think it stabilized EBS. They haven't gained that market share back, but they've stabilized. A lot of the murmurs about leaving EBS have sort of gone away. Now, Gil has come out and created best practices for aggregators. It's very interesting because EBS is not an aggregator. EBS is by all intents and purposes, an exchange. It's an ECN. But EBS prices now find themselves in other places, and competitive marketplaces are aggregators. And
those being as an examples?
FXall operates an aggregator. Very interestingly, Market Factory is an aggregator that was built by the former CEO of EBS, James Sinclair. There are several other aggregators. Integral operates an aggregator. You could argue that CurrentX is still operating an aggregator in some shape or form. There are some other ones that are coming onto the market that I've actually had a chance to have conversations with, and the way they operate and the way they charge and the way the prices are being put into those aggregators and delivered downstream to the end customer, I think you can lose some of the transparency of the market. You can lose where those prices come from. You can manipulate the prices when they're in the aggregated form. FlexTrade operates an aggregator as well. Portware operates an aggregator. So I think
sometimes, as we discussed in part one, the amount of markups, the charges, these get obscured. They'll get out to the end customer of the aggregator who may or may not know what the real original price was, or he probably doesn't.
That's correct. Probably does not. They've all been sort of groomed, as we call it. The prices are groomed as they come through the aggregator. The plus side of an aggregator is it gives you a unique marketplace. Each individual participant has their own unique marketplace based on who's being aggregated. Some of these aggregators aggregate aggregators, you might say. So you may have several ECNs inside of an aggregator, including EBS. And now this phantom liquidity problem is exacerbated. It's even worse now. Because it's all right there.
It reminds me of CDOs begot CDOs squared. So you have aggregators squared.
Yep, exactly.
Phantom
squared. You know, phantom squared. And I scratch my head. I think, who would allow this to go on? Why? And where's the value in it? Because really, at the end of the day, you're just going to become frustrated because your fill ratios are going to be very low.
Well, I've heard from some aggregators who will remain nameless that goes, oh, we can, on our one set of pipes, we are a wonderful utility to you, and we can aggregate all these other aggregators through our unit. Oh, but you're not allowed to aggregate us through somebody else. So we'll be the central core, we'll be in control, but you can't solve our prices, because in the end, of course, it's still just UBS, Deutsche Bank, Citi who are providing the prices for most of these things.
That's right. That's right. So I think that what Gil's tried to do is come out and sort of openly say this shouldn't be the Wild West. There should be some rules around how we operate, and if you follow these best practices, you're going to sort of discover where the good prices are coming from, and those natural pools are going to kind of get a little more value. They're going to be seen as the superior places to execute. And I think there is a desire to drive more people's eyes back to EBS, not look around at these other venues, but to say, look what's going on in EBS. EBS really is the best place to execute, at least in their eyes. And we should be attracting more attention. And a part of it also is, if you look at EBS Direct, which is a new product that's coming out, if you look at EBS's consultation platform that they brought out, this white paper that Gil wrote is one of the very first that's come out, but there are going to be more. I think you're going to see more of these continue to come out.
And just defining EBS Direct is where, if the buy side, if you've got a relationship with Deutsche Bank, you can use our pipes to go directly to Deutsche Bank.
That's correct.
And that is no, I'm not sure how the fees are paid in that, but it's essentially in competition with the aggregators. Without the need for a prime.
That's correct, and it looks a lot like FX Go, for example, that Bloomberg operates. And it's a new way to sort of look at the market, and I think if you look from EBS's standpoint, they recognize the different players in the market, and they recognize, okay, well, we lost 20% of our core spot, for lack of a better term, bank-to-bank high-frequency business. But rather than trying to get that back, let's go get 80% or 60 or 70 or 80% of a different market. Or let's create a new market altogether, and let's build the business in that direction. And I think that's the difference you get by bringing someone like Gil in to run EBS versus bringing up another guy who comes from the bank as a former trader and kind of work their way up the ranks into that role.
Right. That's one of the things where we have to tap our hats to FXall, who developed a great presence in the corporate market, as well as the money market. And FXall, of course, now being owned by Reuters, the rival of EBS. I guess you can't keep the players straight without a scorecard. So the questions, let's just read them off. the aggregation provider FAQ. They're talking about what are your sources of revenue on the back of my flow. In addition to the brokerage I am paying, is there additional brokerage collected from the liquidity provider? Is there a central counterparty or prime broker involved? Is any of the spread retained there? Do you mark up prices from all liquidity providers equally? If not, how is that done? All this gets down to the idea of breaking through and giving price transparency.
That's right. And it's something that I think this layer of opaqueness has reemerged with the way these aggregators are operating, because a lot of what is being asked, that transparency was created in the first sort of iterations of these ECNs, and so the customer sort of knew, okay, I got my single prime broker, I know what I'm paying my prime broker for executions, I know what my fees are with the prime broker, I have a one-to-one relationship with the vendor, with the venue, so I know what I'm paying them, so I can sort of see exactly what's happening. We were very aggressive at Lava to disclose. We told all our customers we're charging the bank and we're charging you. And
but you didn't tell the amount that you were charging the bank. That was private and privileged.
We published a range. Okay. So because each bank was different, right. Ours was based on flow. So the more they did, the more the less they paid. Mm-hmm. And then we had some flag waiver discounts, which you always want to do for the first movers. But we would say a range. We were never ashamed of what we were making, because we felt like we put out a superior product and we were happy. We needed to get paid in order to be there for the customer, so we could continue to improve technology. And that was the other part about what some of these technology vendors do. When you ask questions, why would you trade a certain way? Some of the time, it's simply because the technology vendor is willing to continue to improve their technology over time and reinvest in R&D and reinvest in technology, which alleviates that expense on the side of the buy-side customer, rather than building their own. So,
well, that actually, we're going to go to part 4 in a second, but you still charged a price for services. FX Go famously doesn't have that same business. FX Go being a Bloomberg, they, to my knowledge, take no money from either side, and they publicize that, but there are other issues and problems of using FX Go. You got to either manually put in that trade or have a Bloomberg, order management system or other things like that.
Yeah, you're paying. Everybody knows they're paying. They may not be paying for that execution, but they're paying for that terminal, and those terminals are not cheap. So if you look at FX Go and some of the places they're succeeding in a lot of the exotic currencies, because the cost to do business in those exotic currencies is very high and it's difficult to find liquidity. But you can go onto Bloomberg, and if you've already got a terminal, you can do lots of business in small amounts and not really rack up a lot of fees, and that's where the value comes.
And I hear on the exotics, people actually use messaging more to try to discover price, not believing that there's going to be a quoted market. You need to sort of go almost old style, like telephones, and find out where it is.
Yep, and also some people will approach Bloomberg and say, hey, listen, I want to do Malaysia dollars. Can you go find a couple banks that will do it for me? And Bloomberg will pick up the phone and call 3 or 4 banks and say, hey, would you be willing to show a Malaysia pricing Go to a customer that's going to do this business? And then that's okay, it's a captured customer or Bloomberg, I'm already connected, why not? I'll get the price. So that's another way they can build liquidity in some exotics.
Okay, we'll go back for our 4th and final part, and we'll let you make some wild stabs of where you believe the industry is going, what keeps you up at night, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, thanks again. We're here with Mark Smith, BuysideFX, in our interview of the week.
Thanks.